Richard Eric.
Yeah.
So, team's playing really well.
The Eagles? Wait, what?
The team is playing really well right now.
What team?
The team, isn't it?
The Philadelphia Eagles? They beat the Falcons last week.
So you're bragging about that?
I'm an Eagles fan.
Well, I know that, but you're bragging about beating the Falcons? Seriously?
I mean, they're 1-0.
No, the Falcons is my point. You're bragging about beating them?
A win's a win.
You're for you?
The Eagles. When I had flown back on Monday, the airport was just filled with people that had Eagles, like a tire on and stuff.
Do you want me back there?
I'm sitting here.
Hey guys. Hey, good. How are you? Hey, Chester.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Who's this?
It's Sharon Jacobs. I go to Embry Hills with you.
Hey,
Sharon Jacobs?
Yes.
what brings you this way tonight?
This is my daughter and son-in-law.
I know.
Okay, cool. That's why I just came with them.
Yeah. Very good.
That's it.
You know that your doors are
She's gonna be back out there.
Oh.
She didn't find what she was.
Of course.
I'll go find it.
Hey, so we went up to you last night.
Oh,
We
yeah?
won 4-0.
Well, that's good. Maybe they'll do that every night. 5-0 next time.
Hey, that's a different team.
Yeah, what happened?
I don't know.
You got one of these?
Maybe they're just happy.
You need
They got
one
rid
of
of that guy.
Yeah, they played many matches since they got rid of them.
Like 3.
Hello.
It seemed completely different. Like they were like,
How's it going?
Yeah.
lying around.
He made his first substitution like 65 minutes into the game. And they had just played on Friday.
Oh, you need to be back there.
So he didn't start anybody. They were all just playing
It's like the same
And they're playing again on
Saturday.
Saturday.
Really? Is there, what about, there was one person I saw was missing.
There's a couple
Our
of
team
guys.
is Joseph.
No, Joseph is back.
Oh, he's back?
Yeah, the reason he wasn't on was because he's playing for Venezuela.
Gotcha.
So he's back.
Okay.
He scored 2 goals last
Oh, he
week.
scored last week. Is there still like, how many matches are left in the season?
I want to say there's a little more than 10, like 11 or 12.
So is there still an opportunity to make the?
Oh, wow.
Okay. So is there still a chance enough for them to like make that?
We moved into the playoff position last night.
Oh, really?
When we won, we had a playoff.
I didn't know whether or
But it's
not.
still very precarious. There are teams that have games in hand over us.
Oh, really?
They play fewer matches. So we can't slack out. They have to play like this.
Is Orlando a pretty good team?
Second.
Oh, really? 'Cause I didn't know whether or not they were like really good or.
No, they have been very good.
Okay. And they're like, it seemed like everyone was really fired
And in
up. I don't know if
recent
they're a good team or if they're terrible or
In
what.
recent history, they've been. We haven't beaten.
Really?
That's the first time we beat.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it seemed like people were pretty fired up. Looking over at like the, it was at the fan section behind the, over,
Like
over in that area.
I had like
seats
seen
to the
people
left.
go
And they were like,
in there,
they were
but I
fired
just
up.
never
It's like they're,
been.
it's like the energy in the stadium. Yeah.
And it's like all way,
Well,
so
they
like
went
different from like,
It went fast.
I don't know, different from
Oh,
yeah.
It was the same last night. There was only 2
Yeah.
minutes of stoppage time in
Yeah.
the second half.
Yeah. No,
Usually it was like 4 or 5. There
We
was
were
no.
staying like.
Not a lot laying around on the, like, in the match out there was going for it.
In Friday, but,
Is that
We were last
it was
night.
really fun. We did
all of a
like.
sudden? We're a playoff team, man.
Yeah,
We are
which was
now.
fun.
Yeah, we're
We
both
got to see like
playoff.
the island from like the
Who would've thought?
sides, like.
You guys
We got to see like,
every
it was
match
a day we did
so
the
far
press
this
with
year.
us and we like,
So,
right?
yeah.
And it's like, oh,
So, and then when it comes game, you're like, hey, we really need to win.
But like, you do
There's a lot of those coming in, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was crazy
Keep it in
now.
mind.
Keep it in
Like,
mind.
we fall.
Yeah, extra good luck,
Like, and then
Yeah.
people like got off the path
How was that?
and took us
Oh,
like
man, it was
a ways
Yeah, I
away
just
off
was
the
big.
path.
You
And
got
like misled like 30
We tried to do as much as we could up there. I mean,
we all
we
like
spent like
no,
probably like 2
before
days
that,
in the
but it
park
was like
really.
at the beginning,
So
it's getting like
it kind of is, yeah. Yeah, it's not as big as like Rocky Mountain Glacier.
Anyway, so then we had to
but,
come back, and then we had to
we got
have,
to
and
do
that's
like
after
these
we had already
electric
had
bikes the first day we were there, and got to like we rode like 25 miles of
Cadillac
trails or
Mountain
something like
morning
that.
at 3 a.m.
So we got to see like a
Like,
good chunk of the park like just
we
by
were so
doing that.
tired.
So,
We got to the top.
which is like it's a little bit easier than hiking because you're kind of able to cover a little bit more ground and all
I
that
remember
stuff.
We
seeing
got to
bikes. It's like a
the top
really
of
pretty.
that, and then William was like,
It's like
let's go to the bed, we're gonna go now.
Were you guys like riding on the trails?
It was on. It's on. They're called carriage roads, so they were made originally for these like carriage tours that take you
So
on
there was like
some carriage
Beach
through the
Mountain
park.
Trail or something.
So they're like these huge wide gravel paths. So they've got hikers, bikers, the e-bikes. Like they're actually carriage roads and stuff. So.
We get like halfway down the rail, and my friend calls.
I was just like,
Oh yeah.
And hey, I'm sorry,
I was just like, you kind of want to go through the tracks.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we just started going
on
on
the
the
main road
road,
for like
yeah.
a few minutes.
She just like happened to be at that
Just the,
part.
just like carriage and stuff, which gets you like right next to it. It's basically like trails and lakes, sites and all that kind of stuff.
And I'm like,
There's like
so
that.
the only thing to see her was to go back up.
Yeah.
You go past it.
Actually, already on the hill, and we had no water. And I was like,
Yes.
And then I remember you kind of keep
no,
riding.
we did it. We went all the way back up.
Look at it.
And we were like,
Oh, we did, yeah. It was crazy, yeah.
It's like that for you, but like it takes some time.
Yeah,
It takes
I mean,
a little
I'm
bit
like
of
kind of
time.
pretty like fearless
Like,
guy when it comes to
all the
like
rail
hikes or
part,
high
we
adventure
were,
or
like,
whatever. But I remember moments where I was like,
But also
man, if I lost my foot in
and
an
group
hour,
of
I'd
30
die right
people
now.
all
Maybe
did
just-
it.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And then we get in there, you guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like you kind of talk and just like parallel. It's crazy. So.
Were the trees starting to change?
A little bit, yeah. It was still pretty green, but that was kind of why we went this time instead of later, because a lot of the like Airbnbs and stuff were cheaper now than they were like even just like a week later. So, because I think like the end of September, beginning of October is kind of like the peak season for.
I think it's like
If you can't do it on that part, then you
We
should
went,
not keep
we
going.
went there.
I don't know where they ended up.
We went right around our anniversary, October 9th.
It's kind of like a back part.
And they were ready
Once
to
you're
go
up
ahead.
that part, it's
Yeah.
really hard to go
Like,
back
there's
down.
literally
So it's kind of once you get
Right, because they're not really.
So once you get started on that
November
trail, you
to
should not.
March or April.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But that's how they was like. But then there were people trying to come back.
Yeah.
And I was like, why do y'all want to go that way? And then there's a murder. And they were like, is there a break in the people sleeping?
That was years ago.
Like actually after we
It was
Oh, the guy shot.
or yeah.
Yeah. With like.
He just.
Oh, okay.
He's like.
But all the same. We can feel safe, but it's
Do you guys have to take your,
I wish he was here.
do you like, is it like stuff you see? Oh, 18.
Only walks in whatever.
Instagram, it's on Facebook. Yeah.
That's how it
All right, well, good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Eric is going to be continuing his series on Christianity to the Deepest Needs tonight, so we're looking forward to that. If y'all want to open up your songbooks, we'll start with a couple verses from number 464, Peace, Perfect Peace. And as soon as we sing this, I'll lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll get going into the classroom today. Number 464, Peace, Perfect Peace. So, peace, perfect peace, when this dark world of sin, the blood of Jesus whispers peace.
Peace, perfect peace, by longing duty's press, to do the will of Jesus spend his rest. Peace, perfect peace, with sorrow surging round, on Jesus' bosom naught but calm is found. It is enough, earth's struggles soon shall cease, and Jesus calls us to man's perfect peace.
Say a prayer and then we'll get into study. Father in heaven, we're so thankful for the chance you've given us to gather together tonight. We're thankful for giving everyone safe passage so far through the rain. We're thankful for the provision that has provided us through the rain. Father, I pray that you will be with us as we study tonight. Help us be focused and to discern what you want us to discern from your word, and how we can rightly interact with others who may think differently than us, and how we can be a good influence on them, and hopefully bring them to you and help them to share in the peace that we've obtained through you and your Son, Jesus, Father. Lord, we thank you so much for Jesus, and I pray this all in his holy name. Amen. You ready to have this?
All right. Good to be with all of you in this third session here, talking about morality tonight, and just remind ourselves again of what the goals of these classes are, and I want to remind us also of the assignment for the 5th class that I will just be facilitating, so I'm not going to be doing all the talking. So the purpose of these classes, we're trying to understand where our culture is right now, and I think there's aspects in which our culture has moved so rapidly in certain areas. What are the underpinning beliefs that have led to that? How do we know how to speak in a way that that is with understanding with how the world is operating right now, all of that sort of thing. So we're trying to answer from within a worldview of people that don't know the Lord. We're trying to confirm our own faith. Hopefully these discussions have done something so far to confirm that, even people outside the Bible have made some observations that help confirm what I'm seeing here. And so we're learning about those things, and then we're also providing a tool for conversations that we can have with people. You don't need to know all these quotes, but some of them, if you are particularly liking any of these quotes, might be good ones to have in your back pocket for conversations that you might have with skeptics. And so we asked this question last time. I want to ask it again. What are some causes of skepticism? If you're going to diagnose it like it's a disease.
Emotional trauma related to Christ. Or Christians.
Yeah. So you got bad religious experience, distaste from hypocritical Christians. Any other reasons why this happens?
I didn't get what I want.
Yeah, I didn't get what I want. And maybe sometimes it's I want to do a particular sin. Maybe it's the community of Christians didn't give me things that I was expecting from them or whatever. None of these reasons, or cultural background beliefs, I think is another important one to bring up, that if our culture is more accepting of atheism, that might, which by the way, that could go in reverse. If our culture is more accepting of Christianity, is that why you're a Christian? Have you really thought through your convictions? The same thing can happen for the skeptic, as it becomes more and more accepted in our society. So the core idea of these classes is from this question. Given the causes of skepticism, what should we consider in reasoning with modern skeptics today? That if I'm talking to a skeptic that had bad religious experience, that it's one of these emotional reasons for unbelief, and I'm just trying to come at them with archaeological evidence for the Bible, logical arguments for God. There's a time and place for that kind of thing, but am I really reasoning with them from where they are right now. No, we always talk about wanting to meet people where they're at. That doesn't just mean like, oh, you got a question, a particular question, that I'll deal with that question, but it also means reading the emotions and making sure that I'm dealing with their emotional state and things like that. How's it going, guys? I used it for you get to it.
We are now.
Yeah. Okay. So, anything you guys want to say about that? This is kind of the foundation of what we're doing in these classes. Does that make sense? And so what we're doing is we're talking about different needs that we have and showing that Christianity is more appealing with regards to having the resources to provide us these things that we need when we compare the worldviews, right? So Christianity has unsurpassed resources for universal human needs. The last one, like we said, in a couple weeks, we're going to be talking about community. And I want to give a little bit more guidance in sort of like what I'm wanting you guys to do in that final class. Here are some questions that, as you guys do some research or thinking about, or maybe you can bring up anecdotes or something, be thinking about these kind of questions. What are some of the proofs people need community? Erik Erikson, for example, is a childhood psychologist. And he's written books about why children need to be held even at an early age. Like anything that you can see that we're built for that sort of thing. What is the secular approach to trying to find community? Thirdly, what are the weaknesses of the secular approach to trying to find community? Why does it never seem to work out the way that it does for genuine Christians? Fourthly, what evidences do you see that secular people lack community? And then another question, what is unique about Christianity that we can have community? You're failing with your PPO responsibility.
Yeah.
That's paper, that's router. Okay, does that make sense? Kind of what that last class is going to be about? I didn't print that out, so if somebody wants to take a picture or do it, but we're going to the next slide now. So, okay, sorry. I can put it up at the end of class. So, the first thing I want to do is talk about how a secular worldview grounds morality. When we're talking about morality, it's decisions that we make that are for good or for bad, ethical kinds of concerns. Grounding it. Does anybody know what I mean by grounding something?
Making it tangible.
Okay, so sometimes maybe it's making it tangible, like it's not just a theory. The idea of grounding is like, what's your basis or foundation for your morality? Like, you might be really concerned about equal human rights, for example, but does your worldview really make you concerned about that if you're consistent with your worldview? What's the basis of your morality? Like, what's the grounding, the foundation of it? Does that make sense? So, the secular worldview, but before we start looking at how secular people would have a basis or an alleged basis for why they care about morality, I like to begin with this quote when I'm studying with skeptics. Julian Baggini is the editor of Philosopher's Magazine, and he's a really famous atheist, and he said this: anyone who thinks it's easy to ground ethics either hasn't done much moral philosophy or wasn't concentrating when they did. Although morality is arguably just as murky for the religious, at least there is some bedrock belief that gives a reason to believe that morality is real and will prevail in an atheist universe. He's an atheist, by the way. Morality can be rejected without external sanction at any point and without a clear, compelling reason to believe in its reality. That's exactly what will sometimes happen. So he begins, whenever we think about, okay, why do you care about morality? This quote, I think, is helpful because people might think, well, that's an easy thing. It's just common sense what morality is. And he says, actually, if that's your perspective on grounding morality, you just haven't thought about this deeply. Because it's very complicated stuff, especially if you're a secular person. Why do you care about morality? Why do you care about equal human rights? You think that there's just simple answers to that, and here we got an atheist saying that. So, what are some of the reasons why skeptics have said that they can ground morality? The first one is that they've suggested that morality comes about from evolution. And one quote for this, Michael Ruse, he says, morality then is not something handed down to Moses on Mount Sinai. It is something forged in the struggle for existence and reproduction, something fashioned by natural selection. It is much a natural human adaptation as our ears or noses or teeth. All right, so where is he saying that, I just gave it away. So he says that morality has come about from evolution, right? So the way that they would talk about this is that you see, like, what are some of the most altruistic animals in the animal kingdoms? I don't know. Are anteaters nice to each other? And they eat ants. Dogs? Okay, so dogs. Yeah, sometimes dogs attack people. But so sometimes they attack each other, but they can also be like cuddle up with each other and things like that. So I don't know about gorillas. Praying mantises are really mean to each other. They will like destroy each other. So that's not a good example. But what people have, like Michael Ruse would point out, is that you look at the animal kingdoms and you see that there's some altruism between animals at times. Like it seems like genuine concern for an animal if it's hurting or whatever, and that you can kind of see or deduce from that we have come to be concerned about equal human rights, things like that, okay? We're going to talk about some problems with this. Actually, this is going to be the one that we talk about more than anything else. But have you guys heard people make this argument? Because this is the most common one in deeper philosophical circles right now.
What's the topic for that?
I'm saying like right now, like the atheists that I'm studying with, their big argument is morality has come about because evolution gave it to us. That we've evolved to the point where we care about equal human rights and things like this. Yeah. So that's what I hear people saying a lot right now. Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, is it morality has evolved because it's more fortuitous for the species for us to be altruistic and help each other, or because it just like randomly comes about, I guess, when we've had enough time?
They would argue it both ways, that it's randomly come about, but it does help the preservation of mankind and things like that. But you're already starting to see some of the flaws of it in the question that you guys taken up. Any other comments or questions before we start dialing down on some of the problems with this? All right. Does that make sense though? What people try to argue. All right. So let's talk about some of the problems with it. Thomas Nagel was an NYU professor. He retired a couple years ago. He's still alive, but he wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos, and he's an atheist philosopher. By the way, this is a helpful little thing to know. You know how in the Old Testament, who kept the kings accountable when they were immoral? Like you see the rise of the prophets, right? Like Daniel, Nathan and whatever, like all the writing prophets, keeping the kings in check. So in the secular worldview, in the secular world, who is it that keeps scientists in check? Anybody know the answer to that? It's a whole field of study called philosophy. That's a lot of what philosophers do, is they keep scientists in check. So not all of them, but that is one of the things that philosophers pride themselves in. So Thomas Nagel, a philosopher, he said this is one of the problems with evolution and morality. He said if evolutionary biology is a physical theory, as it is generally taken to be, then it cannot account for the appearance of consciousness and of other phenomena that are not physically reducible. Did we look at this quote last time for another reason? No, I don't think we did. Okay. What is he saying here? What's his argument?
Consciousness is not physical.
Yeah, there are things about humanity that are not physically reducible. Like, where do value judgments come from? Where does the conscious come from? The consciousness come from? It's not like, if I'm thinking about like a green banana, it's not like it's literally in my head, right? It's like a non-physical thought that might have some connection to my physical brain, but it's an immaterial thing. So evolution teaches that it's all chemicals doing one thing after another. Everything is some kind of chemical reaction, right? And so if evolutionary biology is a physical theory, it doesn't allow for non-physical things, then how does it account for consciousness and moral judgments and things being right and wrong? You can't derive morality from that kind of process. Does that make sense? Is everyone tracking with that? Yeah.
So I guess I've kind of heard that a lot of it boils down to sort of the advent of agriculture within the human species. And so the argument is that humans, through various iterations, were able to come up with the abstraction of the future. And so by virtue of being able to abstract the future, they're able to start doing things like plant crops. But then also, I mean, kind of as a result of abstraction such as the future, you can start to consider, kind of a primitive morality, which would be based on, well, this could turn out bad later, so I'm not going to do it now. Kind of in the same way, if I plant seeds now, I'll have food in the future. I mean, that's, of course, abstract. But even like computers, they don't have the concept of abstraction, but they're capable of doing things like predicting trends in the future when they exist very firmly in the physical, non-abstract world. So
Yeah,
what would you
but
say to
yeah, and computers will never be able to meet all the capacities of a human being. Right.
but they can understand to a certain extent the quote-unquote abstraction of the future.
Sure.
Which is a real thing. We all understand that the future does exist and will exist.
Right.
But because it does not yet exist, it is technically considered an abstract concept.
Sure.
So like what would you say to something like that?
I would say that people still had to design the computer. The computer had to come about by consciousness, which is still an immaterial thing. So it's derived. It's rooted in something like a data, like a USB drive is a physical thing that has, I guess, in a sense, non-physical things in it, right? But it's still created by immaterial thoughts that became physical things, right? So to some extent, it's been able to replicate certain things, but it still has a certain kind of physicality to it, which I suppose a human being does, because we have brains and all that sort of thing. But there's still enough things about a human being, like value judgments, for example, that computers only compute. But for a human to have a value judgment, like that's good or that's bad, well, what is that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it seems like an immaterial thing that you're judging, or these ideas that you're using. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that's the first problem with this is that it's hard to get things that are clearly non-material from a materialistic process. Here's another problem. Steve Stewart Williams, he's also an atheist. I like this quote. He's basically showing that that evolutionary biology is not a good recipe for altruism. And here's what he says. If morality were a direct product of evolution, why would people constantly argue about what's right and wrong? Why would we spend so much time teaching our children to be good and inculcating in them virtues such as generosity? Why would we experience inner conflict between what we think is morally right and what we really want to do? You might expect that as an evolutionary psychologist, I'll have snappy comebacks for each of these questions, but I don't. Traditional moral systems tell us we should not act to satisfy our own selfish needs, but instead should act altruistically. That is, we should act to satisfy the selfish needs of other people. This hardly sounds like a recipe for evolutionary success. You see what he's saying here? Is that evolution teaches that it's the strong eating the weak, right? So we all descended from apes, therefore we should love one another. It's not coherent with the whole system that we're even talking about, right? So that's another problem with that, and I'm going to say more about that. At this point, I'm going to have a couple more quotes on it. Any comments or questions on that? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that the other thing that's kind of behind what he's saying is, if you're the person who's generous, well, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage to those other people who are not, and so you're probably not going to reproduce. You're not going to mate. You're not going to survive because you've given your food to other people who are not generous.
Right.
And so the non-generous ones are the ones who are going to predominate.
Right.
So in their pattern, the practice of generosity doesn't even make sense.
That's right. Yeah, and we're going to see in just a moment, it actually, you could argue under the evolutionary worldview that it becomes unethical to help the weak.
Yeah, right.
Which is what Hitler did. We're going to see that in just a second. Yeah. And any comments or questions on that? Isn't that just like a basic point? You're like, wow, it's such a good point to bring up. You don't need to know this quote. But it's helpful that there's other atheists that have recognized this. You're talking to somebody who's, really into equal human rights and social justice and things like this, and you go, okay, so you believe in no God, you believe in evolution. Where did this idea come from to be concerned with those who are weaker? Because your worldview says that they should die off, or they will die off, and so you better not try to even do anything about it. Why would you care about that in your worldview?
In fact, you're making the race weaker.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so let's go to this other quote. Charles Darwin. I had mentioned this quote last time, but here it is. This is a very helpful quote to know. But Charles Darwin said this. This is in his book. Did we talk about his book, The Descent of Man? I did a gospel meeting this last weekend, and I preached on some of these things, and I think I brought it up there, so I'm getting things mixed up. So Charles Darwin wrote a book called The Descent of Man, which is a book about who you should date, based on the worldview of evolutionary biology. So here's something that he said. At some future period, not very distant, measured by centuries, the civilized races of man, notice that he says civilized races of man, who do you think he's talking about there? Let's keep reading. Will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. At the same time, the anthropomorphous apes will no doubt be exterminated. The break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we may hope, even than the Caucasian and some ape as low as a baboon, instead as of now between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla. Did you know that Charles Darwin said this? And like, why isn't he canceled? I don't know. He should be. But under his worldview, who is he calling anthropomorphous apes? Any Australians here? He's not here, is he? Yeah, James. So James, you guys, sorry, and Chester, you guys are all anthropomorphous apes and savage races. And do you guys realize that the guy that was a strong? I'm sorry, too. I didn't want to leave you out. So this is what he says. So what this worldview, what has it led to? At least in some, I'm not saying everybody that believes in evolutionary biology is going to believe this, but I'm saying it's consistent with this worldview. That's my point. Any comments or questions on this quote here? Yeah, Dan?
Well, I think more modern viewpoints of evolutionists, like kind of biology, I think they consider things like, dogs that are friendly, or, wolves that were friendly were bred into dogs, and thus they found success as a species. So it's like, there seems to be like an argument, like, because Darwin, I think at one point he said it wasn't the strongest of the species that survives, but the one most adaptable to change.
Right.
Or maybe some later guy said that, I don't know. But it's like, I think the viewpoint seems to have shifted from this kind of more violent, and they would say primitive viewpoint of what evolutionary theory is, to today a more, enlightened whatever, where there is room for things like generosity and...
So the theory evolved, is what you're saying? Yeah, I mean, clearly it has.
Yeah.
And so a lot of evolutionists today wouldn't even know that Darwin said this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So I have a question about just evolutionary biology, I guess, in general for a second. Like, does that mean that by itself, without like people taking action, these things just happen?
Yeah, I don't know that Charles Darwin is advocating that we need to go out and kill a bunch of people, but he's saying this is going to be the natural thing that happens because this is how evolution works.
Right.
Which, by the way, it hasn't happened.
But that was going to be my point. It's like, unless what he means is that they will almost certainly exterminate by like taking action, but that would go,
I don't.
That would go directly against evolutionary biology, right?
Right.
Like it has to be a natural thing that just occurs,
right?
Not something that that people have to intervene and do,
right? So. And he's pretty certain that in a couple of centuries it's going to happen, and it clearly hasn't happened. So his prophecy was wrong there. Yeah.
I mean, to your point, like that was a lot of what the eugenics movement kind of came from.
Yep.
People trying to make that happen. And that's a whole other...
No, well, this is the next quote. Tom Holland, not Spider-Man. A different Tom Holland that is a little bit more educated. I don't know about the other Spider-Man guy, if he's educated or not, but this guy wrote a good book called Dominion. I've read this up before. He's an atheist, but he wrote a book on the contributions Christianity's made to the world. That we live in a society today that cares about equal human rights, and it does care about, like, when did hospitals ever come? It came after Christianity. People started caring about weak people and all. So he goes and women's rights and all these things. He's shown how Christianity made a permanent impact on the world. We talked about that a little bit last time, but here's a quote from that book. He said, Hitler's policies, although rooted in a sense of race as something primordially, ancient, were rooted as well in the clinical formulations of evolutionary theory. The measures that would restore purity to the German people were prescribed equally by ancient chronicles and the Darwinist textbooks. To eliminate those who stood in the way of fulfilling such a program, he's British, that's why he's with the E at the end, was not a crime, but a responsibility. Apes massacre all fringe elements as alien to their community. Hitler did not hesitate to draw the logical conclusion: what is valid for monkeys must be all the more valid for humans. So, have you ever heard people today say that, "Oh, Hitler, he had a Bible and he was a Christian, and look what he did"? That's a common thing that I've heard people say, and it's like, don't you even know anything? I mean, his ideas came from evolutionary thought. Like the Holocaust came about from taking evolutionary theory and applying it to man, and our ethics become kill these people because they're not good for our race. That becomes your ethic. It's not just a bad thing people do. You actually get to a point where you think this is what must be done. Any comments or questions on that? The point of this is that evolutionary biology is inconsistent with altruism. And historically, that's where it's led, yeah.
So what are some of the ways that people respond when you put this in front of them? Because I imagine that like the majority, if not all, of anyone you speak to would say, oh, I'm not racist, I'm not advocating for the genocide of certain populations, or whatever. What is like the response that people give to that?
Their response would be probably something along what Tim was saying, that like, yeah, well, clearly Charles Darwin's not right about that, but he started a theory that I think has proven true, and but it doesn't mean that we have to take everything that he said. And then the follow-up is, so why do you care about equal human rights? Like, if we've already established that there's some incoherency in your worldview to be concerned about that, and historically this is where this idea has led, what made you different? What made you hold to this theory? And then you kind of, really, whenever I have these conversations, I'm trying to attack value judgments. Because they'll say, this is good, this is bad. What do you mean by that? How do you know what's good and bad? But I try to use these kinds of quotes to wait for them to say good, bad, whatever. How do you know? How do you judge those things? Your worldview doesn't seem to be able to have the resources to answer those kinds of things. And so that's kind of the track that I go down. Yeah.
Just adding to what you're saying, I love science. I'm a big science geek, nerd guy.
Oh, watch out for this guy.
But the reality is that every experiment is conducted for a purpose, for a reason. Somebody's funding it. Somebody's you want to find out this thing and not that thing.
Yep.
So you're searching it out. The whole name.
Are you suggesting that scientists might not always be objective?
Dare I say? So the initial name of Origin of Species, the actual full title is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life.
Right.
That's what he set out to do.
Yep.
So it's just the.
And he was white. Yeah.
Just setting your point on what you literally just said, not nothing. When I studied philosophy in undergrad, and that was a point that came up a lot, and they constantly, attempts that it was like a big introduction of like different things.
Right.
And even like all my professors were atheists, but even they would ask questions like that, like where does the value come from? And everybody would be stumped.
Right.
Including myself. And I was like the only Christian there. Everybody knew that. So this is very helpful in terms of like, let's still have those conversations now with some of my peers. So.
Yeah. The jugular is always value judgments. Why do you think that? How do you know that? And these quotes help kind of give us a springboard to have those things. Blake and then David.
So the last line, what is valid for monkeys must be all the more valid for humans. But what if humans have evolved? Why is it all the more valid?
Well, we're just a higher order of apes that we can actually learn something from what they do, because it's clearly helped those apes to advance. And so by that same analogy, it'll help us as we currently are to kill these other people. It's what they've done to advance, it's what we'll do to advance.
That's very specific. You have to pick and choose what you observe within apes or monkeys. It says to then say, oh, that's valid for humans. Because there's no way that someone would think that all we observe from monkeys, humans should do because that's what we come from.
There's probably some fraternities that do hold to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in this case, it's clearly picking and choosing what will benefit us right now in our philosophy of the world. If we kill these people, it will be better for us, things like this. I mean, even people that think that the earth is overpopulated, like, they don't like families, that people that have lots of kids and stuff like this, and like, this kind of thinking has kind of led into a lot of different philosophies. I remember one time my dad was buying Christmas gifts for the kid, for me, and I have a brother and a sister, and the woman that was checking him out said, how many kids do you have? And my dad said 3. She said, don't you think that is contributing to overpopulation, and my dad said, "How about you lead by example and go kill yourself?" My dad is like, that's the kind of person he is. So, I'm a chip off the old block. Okay. All right. So here's another grounding for. I'm not. He's not a Christian. Okay. I'm more guarded and filtered. Okay. So here's another thing that atheists try to ground their morality. Is that morality comes from social consensus. This is just an easy one to attack. It's just sad that people even use this argument anymore. But I like Greg Koukl, what he says about this. The first serious problem is that it violates our deepest moral intuitions, the foundational assumption of civilization. Some things seem wrong regardless of what society says, including plundering innocent Jews, pressing them into forced labor, and exterminating them. If there is no law above society, then society cannot be judged. Which he leads into this quote then. Moral reformers typically judge society from the inside. They challenge their culture's standard of behavior and then campaign for change. If morality is defined as the present society's standard, though, then challenging that standard would be an act of immorality by definition. Social reformers would not be moral after all, but rather moral outcasts precisely because they oppose the status quo. So he's saying if morality comes about by what society says is right and good, that it goes against human intuition because we don't look at what they did in Nazi Germany and say that was actually a good thing and stuff like this. I just found out about a book called In the Garden of the Beast that I want to read. It's by a guy named Erik Larson, and it's a story about a real story about a family that lived an American family that lived in Germany during the rise of Hitler. And so he's like kind of collected, I think, their memoirs and kind of told their story about how was it that he came to power and how was it that society was deluded through media and the news and all these things to allow them to get to a point where they thought this was all okay. That's a book that I want to read sometime. But I guess those people were brain deluded to think that those things were okay. But we look at it today and we go, how could a society ever think that that was okay? And if anybody ever wants to be a cultural critic, you're actually being immoral by society standards if society gets to determine what's right and wrong. So any comments or questions on that one? That one's just so easy to defeat that I don't even know that we need to spend a lot of time on it. Yeah.
How would you handle it then if they took that and paired it with the evolution concept of, well, morality is evolving?
Yeah, so the problem with morality evolving, which I didn't address this one, with morality evolving, there's still not like an objective thing. It's still bendy. Like, is it okay to lie or steal or cheat? Why? Like, would there be times where it might actually benefit some population of people? And so you still go to the problem of like, where does your sense of right and wrong come from? You just said that it might have come from evolution, but you haven't given like some kind of objective outside standard because there's still a lot of room for debate, right? So you still have all of those problems, even if you combine these things. Yeah, and then Brian.
Adding to that, in my opinion, this typically falls apart when you introduce time and place. Time, easily, you just go back, 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, it's okay to enslave me, to kill Joe, to take this person's land, but you don't even have to move back in time. You can stay in the present day and just change places.
Right.
People dedicate their lives to flying some planes into civilians. There are other people who have dedicated their lives to, those other people who did that in the first place.
Right.
These are competing moral values which each society believes is okay happening at the same time.
Which is evolution, right? It's the strong eating the weak. That's what we, in our increasingly secular world, what you're left with is just recapitulations or repackagings of the strong eating the weak.
I guess what I'm saying is, if morality is evolving with time, when you look at, all the hundreds of cultures that exist right now, the morals are still different. They still disagree, and the strong has not overtaken the weak. So either you need World War III to happen, so the strong can then make the decision. But even then, let's say the United States is strong or whatever. In the 50 states, you have disagreements.
Yep.
In the states, you have disagreements. No matter how small or big you get, your neighborhood, your country, your world, even at the same time, morality is evolving differently, and nobody's winning.
That's right.
It's cyclical, but
yeah.
Anyhow.
Well, you can see the manifestations of power struggle, right? We have at our core in our society an evolutionary worldview, and it therefore will lead to subconsciously, unconsciously, the strong eating the weak. And whoever can punch the other people the hardest, the strongest, or whatever, becomes the people that have power. And that's what's inevitable when God is up. Yeah, this brings up a whole other thing. Common law, in the legal system, common law was like kind of a fixed idea of what was right and wrong and how judges would decide things. Once evolution came, that theory also bled into the Supreme Court and to the court system. I'm not trying to make any political statements. This is just a helpful thing to know kind of where our society, how our society has become what it is. But you've got evolutionary thought and theory being used for things like Nazi Germany, and we go, oh, that was really ugly because we got video cameras and all that, and people could kind of see what was happening and whatever, so we're really appalled by that. But this way of thinking came into the court systems, where if there is no objective right and wrong, and morality evolves and everything evolves, this is why we don't have even in the Supreme Court systems, any kind of firm, there's outside of us something that we have to abide by. And that's why you get all kinds of immoral things being allowed in a society and things like this, because there's not this recognition that there is an objective law. Does that make sense? And so that's one of the explanations for why we are where we are. Okay, I think I forgot to put the other thing on here. I did, okay. I forgot to put a fourth thing that people will try to ground morality. And so if people try to ground morality, I put it on the sheet though. You guys have the sheet. People try to ground it in evolution. It's incoherent with that worldview for several reasons. Social consensus doesn't work. I guess there's three. The third thing is that morality comes from social contract theory. Now, does anybody know the difference between social contract theory and social consensus? This is an important thing for these discussions, depending on how deep you go with somebody. Social contract theory is not the same thing as social consensus. So, Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote a book called The Social Contract. Who was the one that wrote the book Leviathan? Thomas Hobbes? I think it was Thomas Hobbes. So, the shorter version of social contract theory is this book by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And he said this: each of us puts his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will. And in our corporate capacity, we receive each member as an indivisible part of the whole. So, this is not whatever society determines is right. This is the more common, sophisticated thing that the person taking philosophy classes today will bring up. They're like, oh, no, I'm not talking about social consensus. I agree, Hitler was wrong, and everybody that was going along with that, so I don't argue social consensus. What I argue is social contract theory. What's social contract theory? Based on this quote from Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
It is your general will is more individual.
Well, the general will of the people is like the good of the people, right?
The only issue is maybe I'm going to be. Then you get this utilitarianism of it, and the major problem with utilitarianism is that it ignores the minority viewpoint, even if that viewpoint is right.
Those are going to end up being inevitable problems with it.
Yeah.
But here's I remember when I had this discussion on morality recently with some skeptics, I was like, so what do you guys understand social contract theory to be? And they liked this quote. And they said that social contract theory, I'm pretty sure I showed them this quote, whatever. They said social contract theory is when you start with the belief that everybody in a society wants what's best for everybody. Already this is a dream. That's why it's called a theory, by the way. Social contract theory. It's never been done before. It cannot be done. You can't get a group of people that are totally just sincerely, there's no Judases, everybody just really cares about the betterment of everybody else. Right? And so when they said, well, our morality comes from social contract theory, okay, well, what is that? Then we talk about all these things. Then I did ask them, are there any countries that have done anything close to social contract theory? And they said, well, the United States is the closest. So, I don't know. So, social contract theory is a theory, which is probably one of the most honorable things about the theory is that they're willing to call it a theory. Because it hasn't been practiced ever. It's just a nice idea. That sounds kind of like heaven. You're not going to get it in this life. Okay, anything else you guys want to say about the social contract theory or any other ways that skeptics will ground morality? Yeah.
Well, I guess my kind of thought process on all of that too is I'm just thinking if I remove myself from the Christian mindset, to me, like, I know the Dharmic religions in the East are largely based on cause and effect. And the reason why something is good or bad isn't because of some divine being telling you one way or another. It's good or bad because of this effect that it has on your karma. And I think we kind of see that, not necessarily in a religious context, when a lot of people, they'll tell you something is bad because it hurts somebody,
Yeah.
and something is good because it helps somebody.
Yeah.
But I think too, there's this weird idea of everybody has inalienable rights, which is a silly idea when you think, where could that possibly have come from?
Right.
But, so it's like, so then you kind of base your good and your bad on that. And I think that's kind of close to
That's a derivative of social contract.
Okay.
That I'm individually going to try to do that, right?
So then what do you think about the idea of good and bad come from their, I guess, not karmic, but, their, quasi-karmic?
Yeah, like morality is like whatever doesn't hurt people, right? So then I remember I recently had this discussion with somebody who made that point as a derivative from social contract theory. And he said that, I said, okay, what about pornography? He's like, there's nothing wrong with that. I said, have you ever, realized, what happens to those people involved in it, and the depression and the suicide rates and the drug rates, and and have you thought about what it's doing to you when you watch these things? It's pretty bad. And so then you get into the debates, well, how do you define what's good and bad? And it's or like the peeping Tom. Is the peeping Tom, pretty creepy person, but is he harming anybody? Especially if the person that's being watched doesn't know, So there's too much room for debate, and there's going to be so many differences on what does harm people. So you're still running into the problem of not having an objective reality outside of what your sensibilities are. Does that make sense?
So then why would it be bad that I can't be the decider of what is good and bad for myself?
Because, let's say that you're a consumer of porn. You're contributing to the harm for those people involved in it.
And if I'm not?
What was that?
And if I'm not?
And if you're not, then you got that check mark, but let's talk about something else.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always tracing down something that
what's
they
your
don't...
sin, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, wouldn't we be so paralyzed, we wouldn't be able to do anything because you can't fully extrapolate out the ripple effects of every decision that you
That's
make.
a good point.
So you don't know, let's say us putting down this wood paneling, if it was built by children in sweatshops, in India or something like that, we could be trying to do a good thing, just put down paneling for people so they don't have to step on tile. But in a way, every action we make has a ripple effect where we can't, as people, extrapolate out what is good, not only for us, but for our community, for the world as a whole. Whole.
You would be paralyzed then in that situation. That's a good point. Good. Any other comments or questions?
I was just going to say that the social contract theory seems a lot like you're just pushing your responsibility off on someone else. I don't want to decide for myself what is good and evil, so I want the general will to tell me what it is, and I'm just going to do that. That way, I don't have to worry about any of these things. I don't have to think about these things. I'm just going to do what I'm told.
Sure.
Which seems like a cop-out for any amount of morality.
Yeah. Yeah,
that also seems like what a lot of Christians would like, though.
Would like, in what way?
They would like just to be told every single detail, not think for themselves.
Right.
Decide for themselves.
Yeah, I'm always shocked whenever, a preacher sees more than an audience sometimes realizes. Let's open our Bibles today to Mark chapter 5, and people are like, don't you want to, learn too? If you just want to be spoon-fed? I don't know. All right, sorry. Okay, anything else you guys want to say about the grounding for morality? Yeah, Chester?
Is it possible you can tell what you're doing? It says sometimes.
I just did a face, I wasn't looking. Yeah, I'm sorry.
A dumbfounded look.
Yeah.
What Mark happened? Why should we turn there? Just tell me what it says.
All right, so let's talk about the Christian grounding for morality. That should say Christian up there. The Christian grounding for morality. Let's talk about this question first, though. Many skeptics will point out that Christians are often hypocritical, so to suggest that Christianity offers better resources to be immoral, to be moral, seems laughable. How would you answer that objection? You're trying to argue with a skeptic, hey, Christianity's got better resources for moral ethics, moral living, equal human rights, and then they go, ha ha ha, you guys are all a bunch of hypocrites. Why would you ever say such a thing, that you guys have better resources for morality? Yeah.
Well, they made the error of moving from Christianity to Christians.
Right.
You're talking about Christianity, and they immediately start talking about Christians.
Yeah.
So you got to get them back on track. We're not talking
Right,
about
as it's properly taught in the Bible, like the Crusades, Jesus was against that. He would have condemned that because of some things he said in the Gospel of John, so on and so forth. That's part of it. Like
Resources have to be put to use, so.
That's right.
Like, that says nothing about Christianity. I mean, you could point to people that believe the same thing that they believe, but can't defend any sort of argument. Well, doesn't your belief of, evolution, whatever it might be, atheism, offer better resources to be able to understand and know things? It's like, well, don't hold me accountable for what the person is ignorant doesn't know. It's kind of the same for Christians.
Yep.
Christianity is not held accountable for what some people that claim to be part of it don't do or don't know.
Yeah. I'd bring up too that nobody is totally consistent with their worldview. The skeptic, the atheist, is not consistent with their worldview when they do care about equal human rights. That's something that they have to believe by faith. And that's my favorite example to show that atheists believe things by faith, like equal human rights. Where did that come from? Why do you care about it? Why are you willing to sacrifice for things? So are Christians always going to be consistent with their worldview? Are atheists going to be? Nobody's going to be totally consistent with their worldview. So there's a point at which that argument's a wash, but all those other things still apply as well. Yeah, Haynes?
Yeah, I was going to say, too, this kind of idea, I say I'm a Rousseauite, and you attacked that there's no such thing as a civilization in which everybody seeks the good of everybody else, but I'm a Rousseauite, and you're attacking people, you're not attacking my idea, so kind of a counterpoint to what Richard said. I guess I would say the big difference between a Rousseauite and a Christian would be the Christian faith has a salvific kind of salvation aspect, where the individual who, being immoral, is capable of being transformed out of their immorality through the Christian faith.
Yes. And actually, some of the first writings outside the Bible that condemn slavery, anybody know where it came from? Saint Gregory of Nyssa, I think it was. Like, I wouldn't obviously say he was a Christian or something, or that he believed the way that I would understand about how to be saved and stuff like that. But he's coming from a Christian worldview, right? So there's some of that historically that would be true. Okay, so what is the biblical grounding for morality? Look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image, in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. So 2 questions about this. How does this verse provide a clear purpose for mankind? And then number 2, where does ethical grounding come from for the Christian? The reason that I say the thing about clear purpose is, like, I've used this as an illustration before, but if I take the clicker and I start hammering nails with it and it shatters, so I call Logitech and I say, hey, you guys make stinky hammers. And they go, well, what are you talking about? We make clicketizers. And then I tell them what I did with it, and they said, that's not the purpose of the clicketizer. You can't judge if something's good or bad if you don't know what its purpose is, right? So when a skeptic will say, well, Gandhi was a good person, or Mother Teresa was a good person, or Hitler was a bad person, or you don't even know why we're here. Your worldview doesn't give you the resources to judge if somebody's good or bad. So we have a clear purpose. We've talked about what it means to be made in God's image, that we're supposed to be reflectors of God. But then think about this question. Where does ethical grounding come from for the Christian? From this verse. From God, right? Not even God's word, but from God's character, right? We're supposed to be holy because he's holy. Have you ever heard the Euthyphro's dilemma? Is something right because God says it? Or is something right because, what's the other answer that's oftentimes said? Because of I don't remember. Anyways, morality is grounded in God's character. I don't lie because God doesn't lie. I'm sacrificial because God is sacrificial. It's an imitation sort of thing. And he's not changing, right? He's not evolving. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so that provides like this objective sense of right and wrong that is really not subject to debate. You might have differing ideas on certain need kind of questions, but the general things are all in place all the time. So any comments or questions on that? Does that make sense? Yeah, like
So, built in that verse, is there, I don't know, like a basis for some of the, like the more individual nature of things that we have talked about, where it says male and female he created them, but still taking the sense of morality and purpose from the same source, which is the one that created.
Yeah.
But you can still see within the verse. Like, I'm just asking, like, because a lot of the other quotes brought up a lot of like more individual things instead of like the collective. So does this verse have kind of both, or no?
I think it would encompass all, because what is the collective but individuals who are made in God's image working together? Yeah. Does this make sense? Okay. Yeah.
So what about the growing number of Christians who believe that God created evolution?
That's a good question. So have you guys met any Christians that think God used evolution? When I was in California, there was a guy that I studied with who was from Hungary, and his parents were so smart that they moved from Hungary to Boston to be professors at MIT. Just brilliant people. So I meet him in California, we start studying, he's coming to church, all this kind of stuff. He's eventually baptized, and he believes that God used evolution. That wasn't a question that I felt like I had to like insist he change his view on. Same thing with the age of the world, the age of the earth. Those are things that I have my convictions on those things, but I'm not going to demand that before I would ever baptize somebody that they would need to. But is it incoherent with the Christian worldview that God would have used evolution? It's not at all what Genesis 1 says. You have a lot of questions about who were the first two people then. Was Adam kind of like half ape and Eve was sort of half ape, but they had enough consciousness to be constituted humans? Like, you just have so many problems with that, fitting into what the Bible teaches. So I see it as very problematic, and I get nervous when Christians who go to higher education and take all these classes and stuff think that they've learned a bunch of things that God never knew before or whatever. Even though I know that Genesis isn't a science textbook. But it's one of those things that I'm not going to get into a huge debate about it, but I think they're wrong. And I think I've got good reasons to think why they're wrong. And I'll casually bring it up and hope that they eventually see it. But it is very inconsistent, and it could lead to some other liberal tendencies in how they read the Bible, I think. But it doesn't necessarily have to, but it could. So. Any other thoughts or comments or questions? Yeah, man, what's up?
You had your hand up? Yeah.
Did you have something?
Did you have your hand up?
No, I was just pointing towards you because he wasn't looking at that.
I basically wondering when would you transition to the gospel when it comes to the conversation?
Yeah. So when you transition to the gospel, any one of these classes, like you're showing them that Christianity has better resources, it's more beautiful. Like you're trying to help them understand why it's more emotionally appealing, which could like always spawn off into side conversations or whatever. So it's not always going to be like in a corporate sense that it gets brought up. But so sometimes I'll get lunch with people or whatever. But eventually, so if we're just talking about the corporate, what we're doing together when we study, we talk about morality, and then the next class is going to be hope, and then you guys are going to help me understand some things about community. And after we talk about, whenever I do this, the last one I normally do is hope. Then we start talking about like the objective arguments for God. Like you guys have been doing evidences classes, is that right? Are you guys going to be doing evidences classes?
We have in the past.
What?
We have in the past.
Oh, you have in the past. So I think the traditional evidences stuff comes after this. Because now you're emotionally wanting Christianity to be true. And now you're more open to the facts and data that show Christianity to be true, right? And in the process, it's like, we maybe do a few classes on apologetics or whatever, and then we get into the Gospel of Mark or something. So, but always open to side conversations in the process, because especially talking about morality, people talk about their sense of guilt and their need for forgiveness, and my worldview doesn't give me that. That's a whole other thing we didn't talk about. And so, like, you're always getting opportunities to talk about what Jesus has done. It's just a matter of, like, where are those coming based on the pressure points that they're bringing up. Yeah. All right. Anything else? All right. I'm going to put the thingamajig back up here for the community class. And if you guys want to take a picture of that. And I'm going to come with some things prepared, but I'm anxious to hear what you guys have to say about these things as well.
I'll send an email out with these questions to everybody as well, so
Okay.
that people who aren't here can be thinking about this too.
I appreciate that. All right, what do we do now?
Look, you want to close this in like prayer?
Sure. I'll say prayer.
I heard from Robin and Paulette. They made it to San Diego. Everything seemed like it was good. It was a long drive. It took them, I think, 3 days, and we had a place to stay. I think they didn't say that I can announce that, but I'm pretty sure they're okay if you're ever in San Diego or you want to go visit. I'm sure they'll welcome you. I don't know any other announcements. I know that there are people who are out of town and they're coming back soon. Or maybe they're like come back like this weekend, or maybe come back like before the weekend, so we'll see them Sunday. Oh, and then remember that Sunday we had 2 visitors, Loretta and Ariana. And Ari, who is 16, decided that she wanted to be baptized, something she'd been thinking about. And Loretta is her grandmother. Ari and her parents and family live close by. And so we're hoping that we can be a help to her and aid to her. Hopefully she'll be here Sunday. We're just wanting to make contact and try to really make sure that we are helping her grow in her faith. Honestly, still a little bit unsure of like what it looks like in the home and everything like that. If her grandmother is the one that kind of is helping with that, or maybe her family is all on board with it. We don't know yet, or at least I don't know. So Loretta definitely was very thankful for us wanting to keep up with her, and so we're going to try to do that. But let's be praying that Ari continues to grow in her faith, and despite whatever obstacles are already there or will come up, that she will be dedicated, and that we can be helpful and be used to serve her. Remember the Bible class is coming up over the next week. I think that the ladies' Bible class is this next Tuesday is at 7 at William and Anna's. And then there's some other Bible studies that are more focused on like outreach with the meetup. I don't know anything else to announce. Anybody else? All right, I'll go ahead and say a prayer then. Our Father, we are so thankful that we could be here tonight. Lord, we believe that you fill us up and that you give us a sense of purpose, that it's only through you that we can understand who we are, how to live, and have a hope for what is to come. Or we want to be strong and be firm and growing in our confidence in those things. But we also want to be able to help other people that don't believe that or are unsure of that, see that they can turn to you, that truly your gospel, your plan, it really does give us all we could ever ask for and hope for, and is true, and it will lead us to you, and which is so much better than anything we can hope for in this life. I'm thankful for Eric for his hard work and his dedication, and wanting to share his experiences and some of his research that he's done, and just his understanding of the Word. Lord, we do pray for Ari. We praise you and we give glory to you for her desire to be your child. We know that there's no way she knows all of what that means and all of what that will look like. None of us did. But we ask that she will turn to you, that she will always look to you. And we want to be used. We want to be useful to her, to help her grow. We can help her in so many ways, but we just want you to be glorified in all that we do. That's with anybody that we're trying to help and bring to you. Continue to be with us as a group, Lord. We want to continue to grow together so that we can truly feel and know and show the community that we have through the blood of your Son. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Job pretty recently. I've done a lot of training and found out it's kind of exhausted, learning all that new stuff. How you been? How about you? Yeah, for opportunity. Are you still at is your boss in there? That's why I remember, because I was like, the boss is a weird name in the company. Things are going well.
Yeah, he was the maintenance man for a bunch of tenants. And
It would be no doubt that it wasn't.
I say,
I mean, he had like he took care of, and it was not stopped.
Yeah, he said last year, did this last year, and he took back and his hand was paralyzed. And he said he had like it's awesome. But he should work now, so it doesn't matter. I'm so glad it worked.
I feel like it's only just beginning to do what I Going to be able to get themselves away like that would be Bar Taco, you go to Bar Taco a lot? Yeah, you get people calling you in the evening saying, hey, can you come down and fix my AC? It's going to be more. It's like,
And I want to hear So like, I actually don't know like skin much. Like, I get an incident where like there's some breaker or whatever. It's good for you.
They didn't call 911. I'm like, why are you not? You're telling me not them.
Kelly, so I remember you asked for someone's number over in Ghana for Bible study. My roommate's Ghanan. I'm shameful to say this was last Friday when he sent me this information, but I wanted to let you know I've just sent you this man's number, Ebenezer Menesea, and I think he should be able to get you in contact with someone over there. That's actually, my roommate is also named Ebenezer, but this is a different Ebenezer. Yes, I believe so. I'm going to be very sad if that actually is my roommate's phone number, and I just didn't know. Exactly. Actually, no, because my roommate's last name is different. I know that. So, glad I could be of assistance. My pleasure.
I did a pretty big house.
Honestly, so like for example, what happens is I house in India and some Indian guy will on it. It's great. If I make a mistake or it doesn't stand, they shoot it back to me and say, hey, did you mean to do this? Hey, did you want to do this instead? It's like, it's fantastic. You know, it's not that you want to be making errors, but people know your errors will come. So they know it's always like kind of almost makes you like that. I don't know if I want to make you know that you made an error and work it out. It's like, I can check out what this is. It's all very someone's talking about, yeah, like you can do friends here and there. That's a fantastic
You have to have a lot of confidence in what you're doing to not see it as an intrusion.
The team they do what's called and we're talking these guys will get on their hands and knees and check underneath transformers to make sure they don't sweat. Like they're like white glove property inspection. I could literally go to my friends. They get to be here too.
That's the standard.
That's nice.
Our properties in Atlanta we're basically
There's no yard, there's like.
our properties in Atlanta then
Apparently, you decided to use that by
doing great and making properties for the community. So it's like
That sounds like a challenge.
So it's a company called Foster. So I have two buildings. I have one in Northwest and one in.
It's like before I moved into Mason, there was no.
So I'm driving back and forth between the two. So today I was in Smyrna and tomorrow we'll be in Norcross.
I mean,
It's a good thing.
Sounds like it.
So then like I have great supervisors and great like maintenance team and stuff like that.
Supervisor says, here's your job, if you don't do it and I have to come looking for you, you're fired. Other than that, I'm not, other than that, you're on your own.
I mean, and then we had like the chief engineer for our region. I spent 2 days with him this week, going like from top to bottom of each building.
We spent a lot of time there.
So I just,
And now I haven't seen it.
it's exciting. Like, you have to be nice. But now, I don't know, this week, having done all this stuff, like our chief engineer, I don't know, I feel a lot.
Yeah, I get that.
Like we had a false spiral today, and I knew exactly what it was because I had just done it like a day before.
Okay, yeah, so you got reinforcement there too.
I don't have to worry about work. I can just go to work.
Yeah, it's been great. For Saturday,
Yeah. I'll bring it. I've got one I'm going to donate. I'll bring it.
and